Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a massive story shaking the war in Eastern Europe. Reports that Moscow's vital land bridge to Crimea has been destroyed, leaving Vladimir Putin in what many are calling a state of deep panic. This is a situation that goes beyond military logistics. It's political, symbolic, and deeply personal for Russia's leadership. So let's unpack what's really going on, what this means for the war, and why this single event could change the course of the conflict. For years, Russia's land and bridge connections to Crimea have been critical to sustaining its control over the region. Ever since Moscow annexed Crimea back in 2014, building and protecting this route became one of Putin's proudest projects. It symbolized Russia's permanent claim over the peninsula, and it served as a crucial supply route for troops, weapons, fuel, and food flowing into occupied southern Ukraine. The Kerch Bridge, sometimes called Putin's Bridge, became a monument to Russian power, but also, as it turns out, a major target. When the first explosions ripped through the structure, the immediate effect was chaos. Traffic was halted, sections of the roadway collapsed, and fires lit up the sky. It wasn't just the destruction itself that caused alarm. It was the realization that one of the most heavily guarded pieces of infrastructure in Russia's war effort could be hit, and hit hard. The timing made things worse for Putin, happening right after several political moves he'd made to claim victory over the south of Ukraine. It made him look exposed, unprepared, and, to many in Russia, suddenly vulnerable. The damage disrupted more than just car traffic. Military convoys using that route were instantly affected, forcing Russian forces to reroute supplies through far longer and riskier paths. That meant more fuel consumption, slower deliveries, and increasing exposure to Ukrainian strikes. For the Russian army already stretched thin, this kind of logistical disruption is serious. Supplies are the lifeblood of war. Without steady fuel, ammunition, and troop rotation, even the strongest positions can start to crumble. But the impact wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. Putin had personally opened this bridge, calling it a historic moment. It represented a physical link between Russia and what he sees as returned Russian territory. To see that bridge engulfed in flames sent a shockwave through Russian media and social networks. It was as if a symbol of invincibility had cracked overnight. Russian state TV scrambled to control the narrative, calling it an act of terrorism, blaming Ukrainian saboteurs or Western agents, but the damage was already done. Inside Russia, panic quickly mixed with anger. Hardline nationalists demanded revenge, calling for massive airstrikes on Ukrainian infrastructure. Others, especially those within the military, quietly began to question how such a critical structure could have been so exposed. It reminded many of the previous intelligence failures throughout the war. The overconfidence, the poor security coordination, the underestimation of Ukrainian capabilities. For the Kremlin, this was humiliation playing out in real time. Ukraine, on the other hand, reacted with cautious satisfaction. Officially, Kiev stayed vague, as it often does after major strikes. But Ukrainian officials hinted that this was just the beginning. One advisor to President Zelensky even remarked that everything illegal must be destroyed, a clear reference to the bridge's symbolic status. In the streets of Kiev and Odessa, people celebrated the news, seeing it as justice for years of occupation and proof that Russia's hold on Crimea was not untouchable. Military analysts around the world immediately began to assess the implications. With the land bridge and Kerch connection damaged, Russia's logistics in the southern front faced serious bottlenecks. Supplies moving from mainland Russia now had to travel through occupied Melitopol, or rely on vulnerable ferry routes across the Kerch Strait. These routes were slower and easier to target, making Russia's military operations in Kherson and Zaporizhia more difficult. The term land bridge here refers to the corridor Russia fought hard to create across southern Ukraine, linking the Donbas to Crimea. Losing even part of that connection would mean losing control over a key military artery. For Putin, this is about more than war strategy. It's about political survival. Domestically, he has built his image on the narrative of strength and control. The bridge was part of that image, a triumph of Russian engineering, built under Western sanctions, symbolizing national pride. Its destruction underlines the weakness of his system. Every image of that burning structure chips away at the myth that Russia's military and leadership can protect their achievements. Even loyal media outlets couldn't fully spin this story. The visuals spoke louder than words. And then there's the international dimension. The attack, or explosion, reminded the world that Ukraine still has the capacity to strike deep into Russian-held territory. It also highlighted the role of modern warfare, drones, sabotage, intelligence sharing, where infrastructure becomes both target and message. The Western allies likely saw this as validation that continued support for Ukraine yields real results. It shows that Russia's war machine can be disrupted without direct NATO involvement, using strategic precision instead of brute force. Of course, Moscow responded with fury. In the days after the attack, Russia launched waves of missile strikes across Ukraine, hitting energy grids, railways, and civilian infrastructure. Putin declared the attack on the bridge a terrorist act and vowed retaliation. But the damage had already achieved its main goal, forcing Russia to divert attention, spend resources on repair and defense, and acknowledge that Crimea is not beyond reach. Repairing the bridge turned out to be a difficult task. Engineers worked around the clock to reopen lanes, but each fix was temporary, and new attacks kept coming. Ukraine later used naval drones to hit parts of the structure again, causing further damage and showing that Russia's control of the Black Sea was eroding. Each new strike made the Kremlin look weaker, and each repair made Putin appear more desperate to prove he still had control. What makes this situation even more damaging for Moscow is how it exposes the fragility of its entire southern strategy. Russia had long relied on Crimea as a staging ground for operations in southern Ukraine. Now, with the bridge damaged and supply lines threatened, the entire region becomes more isolated. The Russian forces in Crimea and southern Ukraine become increasingly dependent on a single corridor, which is constantly under Ukrainian surveillance and fire. Inside the Kremlin, such losses stir anxiety. Advisors and generals understand the message. If Ukraine can hit Crimea's lifeline, it can eventually aim for the peninsula itself. Putin's political allies might not say it publicly, but they realize that every new explosion near Crimea weakens the narrative of a secure, eternal Russian Crimea. The longer the war drags on, the more fragile those claims appear. From Ukraine's perspective, this is strategic warfare done right. Instead of fighting head, on where Russia has numerical advantages, Ukraine strikes at the backbone, the supply routes, the fuel depots, the transport nodes. Cutting the land bridge forces Russia into logistical nightmares, reducing the flow of reinforcements and supplies, and gradually eroding their capacity to hold occupied territories. It's a slow squeeze, and it's working. Meanwhile, public sentiment in Russia grows uneasy. The initial excitement of the special operation has long faded, replaced by reports of losses, conscription, and economic strain. The bridge's destruction becomes another reminder that the war is not going according to plan. Families of soldiers see the symbolism clearly. If the bridge to Crimea can fall, what's safe anymore? That question haunts both soldiers and civilians. On social media, images of the burning bridge went viral within minutes. Ukrainians flooded the internet with memes and celebrations, while Russian censors scrambled to remove panic-inducing footage. But in the digital age, information moves faster than propaganda. The symbolism was unstoppable. Even Russians who avoided news couldn't ignore the shock of watching the structure collapse on video clips shared privately. The moment became one of the most powerful symbols of resistance and vulnerability in the war. In military circles, strategists now discuss what comes next. If the bridge remains disabled, Russia will struggle to maintain its occupation logistics. Ukraine could then concentrate on isolating Crimea completely, possibly preparing for future operations aimed at cutting off the peninsula. Some experts believe Ukraine's long-term goal isn't necessarily to invade Crimea immediately, but to make it untenable for Russia to keep it supplied, forcing withdrawal through exhaustion rather than direct assault. As for Putin's reaction, insiders describe a mix of anger and desperation. His speeches following the incident were filled with defiance, but behind closed doors, reports suggest tension and blame shifting among top officials. Each failure adds pressure, and every sign of weakness amplifies the fear of losing not just the war, but control over his image. In an autocracy built on fear and loyalty, perception is everything. When that perception cracks, so does authority. Internationally, the attack reshapes how the war is viewed. Western capitals see it as a milestone, proof that Russia's dominance is neither permanent nor unchallenged. It encourages more military aid to Ukraine, more confidence that the Kremlin's lines can be penetrated. In Moscow's allies' camp, particularly in countries like China and Iran, there's growing discomfort. No one wants to bet on a partner who keeps losing symbolic assets. Meanwhile, ordinary people in Crimea are beginning to feel trapped. The peninsula, once marketed by Russia as a paradise under its protection, is now heavily militarized and cut off from easy access. Tourism collapsed, military checkpoints multiplied, and fear of Ukrainian strikes grew. The bridge, once their gateway to Russia, has become a reminder of isolation. Even those who supported annexation quietly worry about what's coming next. As repairs drag on, costs skyrocket. The Kremlin pours billions into reconstruction while struggling with sanctions, inflation, and a war economy. Each ruble spent fixing the bridge is a ruble not spent on new equipment or soldier salaries. It becomes an economic sinkhole and a constant propaganda liability. Russia claims victory every time it reopens a lane, but Ukraine knows it can strike again, keeping the Kremlin in a cycle of damage and repair. Over time, this kind of psychological warfare drains a country. The bridge has turned from a symbol of connection into a symbol of fragility. Every explosion on it becomes a reminder that Russia's grip on Crimea is temporary, that Putin's empire has cracks, and that Ukraine's resilience continues to surprise the world. Ultimately, this isn't just about one bridge or one battle. It's about the larger struggle over control, identity, and legitimacy. For Putin, the destruction of the Crimea link is a direct challenge to his legacy. For Ukraine, it's proof that patience, precision, and persistence can defeat even a larger foe. The land bridge's fall marks a turning point, a signal that Russia's once stable supply lines are now battlegrounds themselves. The panic in Moscow may not be shouted from rooftops, but it's visible in every rushed press release, every military reshuffle, every angry threat of retaliation. The Kremlin knows that if it cannot protect its most important bridge, it cannot guarantee control over Crimea. And without Crimea, the narrative of Russian resurgence collapses. This is why the world watches so closely. Every new report, every drone attack, every repair effort is more than a tactical update. It's a chapter in a war of endurance. Ukraine wants to prove that occupation is not forever. Russia wants to prove that power cannot be undone. And somewhere between the explosions and the reconstruction lies the future of the Black Sea region. So, as we see the flames die down and the smoke clear, one thing becomes obvious. The destruction of Moscow's land bridge to Crimea is not just a momentary setback. It's a sign that the tide of the war is shifting. What once looked like a permanent conquest now looks like a fragile, temporary hold. And for Putin, that realization might be more terrifying than the explosion itself. If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more detailed coverage of global conflicts and geopolitical shifts. Let me know in the comments what you think this means for the future of Crimea and whether Russia can recover from this blow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.